Hi, and welcome to our second interview of Series 2 of the People First interview series, where we shine a light on great companies that not only do interesting and cool work, but most importantly, look after their people. Identify Global is a market leader in personalized career management and talent acquisition, specializing in great candidate experience. Check out identifyglobal.com for more information and the roles we cover and our latest jobs. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Lisa Lloyd, the highly respected chartered psychologist and psychotherapist and founder of Time for Change. Lisa and her team work collaboratively with business leaders using psychological principles and evidence-based practice to create workplace cultures where employees excel and where teams are dynamic and people are happy. Lisa is also the host of her own podcast, Beyond the Water Cooler. Check out those on wherever you get your podcast from. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Pete.
Good, good. So, Lisa and I met at an event at the MK Dons, which was around employee engagement, actually. And like most of these events, I find them quite fluffy and with one specific agenda and not normally about the employee engagement as it was in this case. So I was delighted to catch a brief conversation with Lisa, who's clearly an expert in this area. So I just had to have you on. So thanks for coming and joining us. So Lisa, I normally do a really terrible job of introducing people, so I apologise for that. So perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself first. So, who are you and why did you become a psychologist?
Oh, good question. So I became a psychologist because it was one of the ways I could see to make the biggest impact on people working at a place that I wanted to work at. So I'd done previous roles. I started my work life as a teacher and done various other things. And I was a bit fed up of being constrained to how other people wanted me to work. And I could see where I thought the need really arose. And I wanted to do something where I could get stuck in those with those particular groups of people or those particular organizations and use what we know about human behavior and motivation and neuroscience and so on to really start to unpick and get below the surface of some of the challenges that people are facing.
Wow. So what is Time for Change? What's the idea behind that then?
Yeah, so I think I set up It's Time for Change because I wanted, every time we talk with companies or individuals or whatever the problem is, it's always around something needing to change. There's always that sense of something's not quite right, or actually things are going pretty well, but we want to do them a little bit better. And it's that sense that actually it's always the right time for change. And people can end up putting stuff off or thinking, I've got too much on right now. I can't get my head around such and such because I'm too busy with this. And I think when we're able to look at the fact that actually every day is about change and every day is about what's the most important thing to change right now, and what's the most important thing, is that something about me or my colleagues, or what's that about. As soon as we recognize that, it gives us a kind of permission to say, actually, I do need to keep evolving, I do need to keep developing. I'm not going to get to this place where actually I think I've ticked the box of becoming a great leader or a great manager or great at my role in whatever I do. And it's that sense of I can always be doing something better. So It's Time for Change was really set up around working with organizations around both their leadership level, but also working across the whole company with teams and with individuals, looking at the whole piece around what a workplace needs to be like. Or I shouldn't say workplace now because we're talking about remote working, but what a work culture needs to be like so that people can really perform well, so they feel good about themselves and they have that really positive experience.
Hence the reason why I wanted to get you on. So I wanted to start a little bit further back, if it's okay with you, because a role that when we spoke, you said that you worked for Milton Keynes Council, and I found that role particularly interesting and fascinating. So, and it is sort of related to what we're talking about today because it's about it's about change. Tell us a bit about that role. You were part of a team of psychologists working across a range of levels, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, so I worked with the psychology service in Milton Keynes, and then I was lucky enough to be part of a specialist team, which is actually about improving outcomes for young people. And so, but it's about doing things that were different and additional to everything else that existed, which is what drew me to it, because I was bored of just doing the same stuff. And the thing I loved about that is often people think, right, I just need to go and work with young people. They kind of zoom in and think, right, that's where the solution is. And actually, I was able to take a much more holistic approach and look at actually what is involved in that whole system. So to improve the outcomes of young people, actually, we need to look at their families and make sure that their parents have the skills to look after their children well. And actually, a lot of the where we were working, a lot of the parents weren't looking after themselves well enough and didn't know how to look after themselves well enough, let alone their children. You're looking at schools because the schools were really stretched. A lot of them, because of where they were located, were deemed failing schools. That meant there was lots of issues for the staff there around their own well-being, stress, mental health, and so on. We had all the organisations within those communities. There were lots of charities, family centres, and so on. So it's about working with them so that they knew how best to support the families and the children they were working with. So we're able to look at the really big picture that made a difference to the individuals, sort of at the childhood level. And that's what I really loved about it. I had a blank canvas. It was an incredibly exciting part of my journey, because I was just given the autonomy to just go and set up what I wanted in the way that I wanted. And I had seen for years of working in Milton Keynes where I thought the pockets of need were, and where traditional services weren't able to get involved because perhaps the need wasn't deemed bad enough. So we had to wait for things to get really bad and fail, and then I could get involved as a psychologist. And I was like, why are we waiting for that point? I want to get involved right at the start to prevent all this stuff happening. And that's where I was able to have a go at that. So I was incredibly lucky. I loved it.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it was fantastic to hear that roles of that nature existed,
Mm,
and maybe they need to exist more. I don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the local authority networks these days, but I know, I think it's you know, the benefit. I think everyone understands the benefit of early interaction and that sort of psychological and physical safety for children. And thankfully, we've moved on in the world where children should be seen and not heard.
mm.
And you know, we've given them a voice, and you know, you know, we've had that moment. And I think thankfully, apart from a few crazy cases we see in the news, but you know, we moved on. Do you think we're at that sort of watershed moment? It sounds like we're at a similar point in time with the workplace, and you know, in terms of actually we're looking beyond just that person in the role, and understanding about their mental health and well-being and the impacts that has both in the workplace and outside. Do you think that we're at that stage with the workplace now?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why I ended up moving into the work I do now with companies, because the similarity is so evident that actually we need to look at the whole person and we need to look at the whole system. So companies can no longer just look at their employees as an employee who comes to work um, with us during these set hours and then they tootle off back to their life outside of work. We have to look at our employees as whole people, and that means every aspect of that whole person. And knowing that they're, you know, they're not just within our care. We can't just be thinking about them within those work hours. So if they've got stuff going on outside of work, then actually we need to be aware of that, because we know it's going to impact on their work. We know that if people have the skills and the knowledge to be able to you know, cope with the emotional stress around finance. So we know financial wellbeing is a massive issue for a lot of people right now across the board of pay, so not just particular groups. And knowing that actually they have the support and they have access to help and knowledge for around finance, or particular mental health needs, or whatever it might be. It might be to do with their gender identity and they are struggling to work out how to fit in, and they want some access to support around that. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's about recognizing people as a whole, what's going on for them, what's relevant to them, what drives them in life, and being able to make sure we are kind of joining up the dots and helping them link to whatever is meaningful to them.
You think, from the business leaders that you speak to,
Mm.
is there a fear or a misconception that maybe we're almost turning the workplace into like a crash type environment? We're almost having to, care too much, or maybe they feel like they're crossing the line when it comes to, getting involved in their finances. I mean, beyond
Mm.
obviously pay and reward. I mean,
Mm.
trying to support them. That is there a fear that maybe it's a bit too fluffy, and actually a workplace is a
Mm.
bit, should be a place of, for adults, in commas.
Mm. I think it's really interesting. I think some companies are worried about it's becoming they're supposed to be everything to their employees, and there has to be a boundary. So if we choose to ignore certain aspects, such as someone's really struggling with childcare and or they're struggling with sleep and they're not sleeping, so they're coming in absolutely exhausted, or they're struggling with finance, whatever it is, if we choose to ignore that, which we could do as an employer, we then have to accept the fact that we know that that person's not going to be particularly engaged at work, and then they're not be particularly productive. And there's lots of data around the impact of poor sleep or financial concerns or whatever it is on the ability to focus on work and be productive. So we have to take that responsibility. But then also we don't want to be in a situation where we're supposed to be solving all these problems. So I always say to people that actually you have to know where the boundaries are. So for example, if someone is worried about their finance, first you need to know about that. What is it that's causing them a challenge right now? So you need to have that conversation, but then you just need to know who to signpost them to. So it's not your responsibility for resolving that. It's not your responsibility to make sure they have access to that support. But if you can just help them identify who they could go to, and for bigger companies where they have a lot of employees and they can therefore have might be a financial wellbeing advisor going into the company and say, like, on this particular date you can come and chat to this person. If it's a smaller company, then just signpost them elsewhere. But all it is about the signposting and the showing that you care. So I think it's not about having to solve all the issues, but it's just about knowing what the challenges are to people, because we either choose to find out about them and signpost, or we choose to turn a blind eye. They're still there, they still impact, but we're just not going to get involved with it.
I think, and is that signposting perhaps, is it harder now that we're in a remote working environment, or because if someone sat next to you, you can see that stress, or you can see that perhaps there's not something quite right, you get the ability to ask the question, whereas now we jump on a call, you can hide all of your tails, you could be fidgeting like mad below the screen, and getting upset, but you're or the swan, as we call it, it's
Yeah.
nice and graceful along the top, but going crazy underneath. So
Yeah.
is that harder now, or easier, or?
I think the easier part is in terms of actually who you can signpost to. Everyone's now got used to working remotely, so no longer are we expecting to meet people face to face to get support. So suddenly it opens up so many more organizations and places that people can go and get help, and they're not necessarily thinking just within their local area. So I think that's a plus. But I think you've identified a really big challenge about remote working, with that sense of actually spotting the signs that someone's struggling. And we have to, I think for me, there's that whole sense of knowing what the signs are. So actually being aware of um, those early warning kind of signals that suggest that maybe someone's not quite right. And it might just be, there are typical early warning signs that we might look for, but then there's also that sense of just knowing that someone's not quite themselves. So when you know someone well, actually noticing when they're not themselves and asking them about it. So don't just ignore it. And I think, it sounds obvious, but so many people will notice that someone's a bit quieter than normal, or they're not smiling as much or whatever, but they don't ask, they don't comment. They just, in their own mind, assume X, Y, or Z, or they just don't think to ask. So I think having that confidence to kind of call that out and just check in. But I think it also comes back to the ability to have those really good quality conversations. And that really is about managers or whoever's the right person. I say who the right person is because we know that so many managers are not the right people to be managers. So there's this whole thing about accidental managers. We know a lot of managers have become managers because that's the next rung of the ladder if they're wanting to be promoted, but actually they're hopeless at working with people and connecting with people. And so they then find it quite awkward having those conversations and asking if people are okay. So if you can't see it, you need to find out by having the chat and saying, what's going on for you this week, and how, what's going well, and actually what's not going so well, including stuff outside of work. And is there anything we can do to help, or what is it you need this week? It might mean you need a bit more flexible working to accommodate some other big stressor, so that actually you don't become overwhelmed and end off on sick leave. So we have to it's about giving the people the right skills to have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come on to the managers in a moment. I think if we, and because I think when we're talking about creating the right culture and environment, often the office environment was where that thing was created. Getting to know people. You
Mm,
had that ability, to meet with people and socials and things like that. And for a lot of companies that I've worked with, they were probably all great companies at one point. The smaller businesses, it's always about the people.
mm,
They often focus on the people because they can't compete for bigger, on the salaries or maybe the benefits. So, they create environments that are great to be in.
yeah.
We all know the cliche bean bags and pool tables and beer Fridays and all that sort of stuff. And these are all
Mm,
great things. Um, except for your sort of Googles and your Facebook types of companies of the world, they've created those environments, even though
mm,
they're bigger. But for a lot of companies, they start off small, and it's all about they create this team environment. Then the company gets bigger, and
mm,
then it changes, and then
mm,
something changes there. So, um, and now that we've gone to a almost remote first, you know, all of that's gone, and it seems
mm,
that all of a sudden people have gone, do you know what? That's not important to us anymore. Or have we been lying to each other? I don't know. Have we been lying that actually we liked beanbags and beer Friday, whereas
yeah.
or have we just traded that in? Well, actually, I like beanbags and beer Friday with my family or my friends as opposed to my
Mm,
work colleagues.
mm,
And I just feel that we've we've lost that ability to engage in a
mm.
in a remote working environment, or it's become harder. We've done the Zoom calls, haven't we, and the quizzes and all of those sorts of things. So, um, have our priorities changed, or have we been lying to ourselves all this time? What do you think?
I think when there's a big shift when we're working at home, to the fact that obviously we're working in a much more isolated way. And I think we know that loneliness actually is one of the biggest issues, biggest challenges to people working remotely now. So there's that natural craving for connection, which you can get through being in the workplace. And some people, they really miss that. So they want to be back in the workplace to be able to see colleagues and connect with them and so on. Whereas other people who have a family around them and who have a social network around them actually need that less. And I think when I talk a lot about personalization, so that whole sense of there is no one size that fits all. And when companies try to have a one size that fits all, you're never going to quite get it right. So you can have a kind of a broad agreement or a broad approach, but you always need to know that some people will want to be within their workplace more just to have that sense of connection, and that might be around playing pool and sitting on beanbags and having a chat, or that might just be about actually working on something collaboratively with someone, but they want to be doing it face to face, because we know as humans you get so much more feedback, and so it feels so much better meeting someone and connecting with them in person. Whereas other people who are having those emotional needs met in their personal life perhaps don't need that as much through their company. So we know that as human beings we have the emotional need for um, sort of connection and that sense of belonging, and we get that through either our work or our life outside of work, or both. So it really depends on individual's own circumstances. But I think that whole, some companies with the change in their working practice, some who were just about beanbags and so on in terms of ticking the box for being a great place to work, they're struggling most now because that's not something you could transfer to a remote way of working. So you're having to rely on people finding that, that way of sitting on a beanbag and having fun outside of work. Whereas the people who had that as a little part of what they meant by their whole work culture, and actually their work culture was really about relationships, and it was about that sense of belonging and that sense of being connected and so on, and they can still achieve that working remotely, then they're the most successful companies. So people then don't feel the need to have to come into the office or their workplace, because they still feel that sense of belonging and they still feel that sense of being connected with their team, even though they're not in the physical space with them.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you've got environments where, and you talked about managers that would thrive by having everybody together, and because it was their style of management. Whether that was part of the culture or not, you get managers that manage by, just being a good person and things like that. And then you've got managers that thrive on, because they're very good at their job and people learn off them. And there are different types of managers, as we all know. But one thing I noticed in the pandemic is that we had, as you call them, accidental managers that were in their job and maybe coping at just managing their people in the office. And those people tend to manage by the book. It's about making sure these people are in time, they leave on time, they deliver their work. And then we thrust them into remote working and having to manage at distance, which when all of a sudden it became all about caring and making sure that, and we saw lots of managers struggle with that, just not in their nature to really care. And not only that, we were having these conversations in people's homes, which would never happen before. So, we saw there's no, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can tell me, there's no training course for this sort of thing, is there? There's this is the thing you have to learn on the hoof, or you develop over time. And I guess people like yourself, help these people with these sorts of skills. And how what challenges did you come up against by speaking to some of your clients and working with these types of managers?
Well, I think the biggest problem that a lot of companies are facing is that assumption that we just end up working remotely, but we just carry on working as normal, without recognizing that it's a completely different way of working, and we need to really rethink our skills, our knowledge, our confidence, our processes, everything. So actually, we need to really hit the pause button, take a step back, and think, how does this work in a new way of working? And I don't think people really got to grips with that because they thought it was a temporary thing. So when we all started working remotely, it was that assumption that this would be temporary, and then we'll all go back to the normal way of working way of working, where we're all present in the workspace. And I think now we realize that we're not going to be going back to that. That actually there's that sense of what we do need to now stop and reevaluate where we're at, because we might have a kind of new sense of a purpose of how we're working. We need to think about how we are communicating with people, because we've got to have different ways of communicating. We've got to check in with people in a different way, because we're not going to just bump into them and see them. We've got to think about how we are looking after our teams, and actually how managers are looking after themselves. So what support do they need? So, yesterday I was in a company all day, looking at actually what how to create a great team when you've got different teams working together, supposedly as one whole team, but actually they're quite separate, and how you create that sense of one identity. And then you've got other pieces of work I'm doing with managers and leadership teams, which is actually, what are your values now? What is your purpose now? What are you trying to achieve? And does everyone know that? And does everyone know what that looks like and what their part is in achieving that? And what are we, what is it that we're recognizing and rewarding? So am I noticing the employees who are on their computer most, and I can see that, whenever I contact them, they're there. So I'm really impressed by that. Or am I impressed by the people who are demonstrating the behaviors that fulfill our values? So if we're really interested in trying to drive a culture which is about looking out for each other and making time for each other and checking in and working out what people are struggling with and helping each other out and that kind of thing. If we're interested in that, then that's what we need to be looking for. So, but do we know what to look for? Do we have that sense of confidence in, I guess, in knowing what we're looking for, and also what to then do with that, how to reward that? Or are we just noticing and just accepting that's how people are now? Because I think a lot of rewards, people talk about performance. If you're thinking about the old way of working, it's very much on outcomes. It's quite traditional. Whereas now, actually, we need to perhaps be rethinking how we're valuing people, how we're noticing them, their contribution.
The key thing for me that you mentioned there is that actually is focusing on the manager. I think the world has, and certainly most businesses, in terms of general employees and looking after them during the pandemic. I think we've pretty much done everything we physically can, give or take. But I think the key thing that's missed out on there is, have we skilled our managers up to cope with the new demand of being a manager in today's remote working environment? And I think the organizations that are leading the way are the ones that have recognized that and supported their managers, because they're always the people, or the managers and leaders, they're always the ones that sort of get expected to know what to do, in these situations. And this was brand new, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah, I really feel for managers. They have a huge burden, because the leadership teams, when I work with them, they're the people who are deciding what has to happen, how we're going to do things, and what's going to look like moving forward. So they almost have that sense of control over the destiny. But the managers get essentially told, this is how we're doing things. You need to get on and make sure that we achieve that. But they're often not invested in enough. So they end up feeling this responsibility to get everything right and to know how to look after my team remotely and to be able to motivate them and to make sure that they're feeling connected and so on. But actually, I don't know how to do that. And I don't actually know how to do that myself. And one of the things I'm focusing a lot on with people is around stuff like authentic leadership and compassionate leadership and psychological safety and so on. And actually, the reason I like that is because that's all about setting a culture where people can really achieve and succeed and feel comfortable. But also, it's very manageable for a lot of managers when you pick that apart and look at what that is about. Because, for example, if you're looking at authentic leadership, then when a manager is able to say, I don't really know what I'm doing. I've never done this before either. This is what we're going to try, or this is how I'm going to, this is my approach to having check-ins, and this is what I'm thinking we're going to do over this next month. But I'm not sure. I want your feedback. I want you to help me shape it. I want you to tell me if you've got some better ideas. And that all starts feeding into being authentic. That feeds into that sense of psychological safety where people can contribute their own ideas. They can challenge their manager and say, actually, I wouldn't do it like that. I think this might work better. And of course, that helps the manager feel better because it takes all the responsibility off their own shoulders and it shares it out with the team and it empowers the team. So you get a real win-win then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think do you think there is a different style? I mean, or is it like, you talk about being authentic. Is it a case of just remote or in the office is continuing to be the same? So I get a sense that some people have tried to be overly caring, and that comes across as being disingenuous, and it's not because they're just trying, and sometimes people can try a bit too hard, and I think people sometimes forget. Do you think there's a different approach to managing remotely, or is it a case of just being yourself and, like you say, just being as authentic as possible?
I think just be yourself. I think when people are themselves, they can't really go wrong. And that includes the people who aren't great people managers. And when they can be themselves and say, I hold my hands up and I know I'm not great at asking how you're doing, and I'm not great at remembering to check in and so on. And actually, I want you to remind me, or it's okay to point out or just give me a gentle nudge. if I'm not quite getting something right, or actually I know I'm not good at that to the extent where someone else in my organization who's better at that sort of stuff is going to do that, take on that role. And I think when people can be honest and say, these are my strengths and these are the things I'm not so good at, and be honest about that, then I think people get that, they respect that. Because as you say, when someone tries to pretend to be everything to everybody, people know they're not really like that. And it takes a huge amount of effort as well for that manager to keep up that pretense. It's exhausting. And of course, at some point that's going to slip. And then as soon as that slips, everything goes to pot, because you've kind of, it takes quite a long time to build up that reputation of having that trust and so on. But you only have to have one thing that doesn't go quite right, and it really sort of undermines everything that's happened. So I think it's much better just to be yourself and be honest about it.
Do you think that the employees are at risk of being more detached from an organization now that they're working remotely? Is it, I get a sense that a lot of organizations, for example, in the news recently, Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, JP Morgan, they're using carrots and increasingly sticks to get people back into the offices at their desks. And even Joe Biden was recently quoted as saying, it's time for people to get back to work, and by that he meant getting into the office. So is there a fear that, well, not having employees in the office, that employees are now detached from the organization, therefore a greater risk of them leaving or being tempted by other organizations and losing that, that, I guess, that part of that culture which people do buy into? I think we all know that, people buy into being a good place to work. But yeah, is there a fear maybe they're going to lose more people if they're not, within their grasp day to day?
Yeah, and that really worries me when people have that view, because I just think if leaders think they've got to see their employees in order to know that they're working and they are going to stay, and I feel secure that I can see everyone who works for me, if they're relying on that, then they're struggling because that's not based on, there's no trust in that. There's no sense of people work with this organization because they want to work with this organization. They're motivated. We all share the same purpose, so we're all on the same page wanting to achieve the same things. And I think and the data is really clear. The research is overwhelming in terms of companies who are putting their foot down saying, I want all my employees in. Employees are leaving. They're because that doesn't work for them anymore. And there's that sense of why do organizations need that? So if you have to have a certain number of employees and at a certain point to keep the company going, then fair enough. But if it's just because you want to see them and you want them to be sitting at their desk in the office so that you can check on them, for me, that raises all sorts of alarm bells. And I think those are the companies who are going to lose without fail the most employees. The companies who are saying, look, we trust you. We know that you're on board. We know because we regularly connect with you and we regularly share and reevaluate our values and our purpose and so on alongside our employees to check we're all on the same page. We believe that you're committed to getting the best for our company, and therefore we know that you're going to do the work in the best way that fits you. So work is not about a certain number of hours. Work is about actually how productive you are. So someone could be in an office for 7 hours and be only 50% productive, or someone could be at home and working for 4 hours and be 100% on. So I think people have to get away from the sense of being in a particular place or working for a particular number of hours is the way forward, and it's actually about how people are able to perform. And if I can get my job done in 4 hours because I can work in an environment or in a way that suits me, and then that gives me time to spend, I don't know, more time in my family or more time doing my fitness or whatever it might be, then that's got to be a win-win. I'm going to be sticking with that company.
Absolutely. I think those things there that you mentioned, and which is where the alarm bells start ringing for business owners and leaders, is that, yeah, well, you're going to go to the gym, or you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And what I say to them is that you know, and I can hold my hands up. I've definitely sat in an office before for 8 hours and been totally unproductive and done nothing
Yeah.
for whatever reason. You know, certainly when my first son was born, I think for the first 3 months, I don't think I did anything. I was so tired. I just looked at my screen and made myself look busy. Whereas, you know, if I'm going to be unproductive, I'm going to be unproductive wherever I'm sat. Okay. So, and it's not a case I'm getting away with it at home. It just means, but I think if from a work perspective, if you have clear goals and deliverables and you're outcome based, now I appreciate some jobs aren't, and you know, customer service, you have to
Yeah.
be available and
Yeah.
you know and responsive, but in most jobs they're outcome based. And if you're an outcome based business and you focus on the outcomes, it really doesn't matter where I'm sat or how productive I was on Tuesday morning. It's a case of, did I deliver it? And if you don't deliver, the conversation is the conversation, whether you're in the office or whether you're at home. And I think that's what I think sometimes organizations miss, or business leaders miss. They get so hung up on the fact that they're putting the washing in or having breakfast late or whatever it looks like,
Yeah.
that they miss the point that it's that sort of losing that control. Whereas at least in the office, you know,
Yeah.
it just it doesn't make any sense. So I think you know, and on that basis, and I think you know, when we talk about that sort of culture, has that changed, do you think? I mean, because I think people have changed. I think, you
Mm.
know, that, and also you get a lot of, you know, teams, tough guys, as I call them, because they're not in the room and everything. They've maybe that, you know, you talk about a psychological safety, they feel safer because they're not in a room with people, and actually they feel they can switch the thing off. Do you think people have changed, cultures changed in in this remote working environment, for the better or worse?
Um, I think people have that. I think people are truer to themselves. So I think, you know, like you were just suggesting, some people actually aren't very sociable people. And so having to go into an office and be with a load of other people actually just heightened their sense of anxiety, or you know, they just couldn't focus as well, or it's just a noisy environment, and actually there's someone who wants a quiet space to be able to work. So, and you've got other people who actually don't like being on their own, and they need something more, their workspace at home actually just isn't conducive to work. So I think the difference is that people are much more aware themselves of what they need in terms of being able to thrive. And so people, rather than it being a given that you work this number of hours and you work in this particular place and then you got a commute and then you're at home, actually we have been able to shape and or reflect on what works for me and be able to shape that. And I think that's given people much stronger idea of who they are as an individual, in terms of how to reassess their own values, what's important to them. And people are saying quite openly now, I didn't realize I needed people around me quite so much. So actually working at home doesn't suit me. I thought it would. Um, or I've, you know, started doing a bit of exercise and I realize actually now if I don't get outside every day, I feel like I'm going crazy. So actually I need to do that. And I think people have had time to assess what works for them, and also just to realize perhaps how things, they used to waste a lot of money and a lot of time on things like commuting and transport and childcare and so on. And actually when we can, you know, particularly with the economy now and knowing how tight finance is right now, when people can adjust their personal life to maximize time spent in a way that works for them, still getting their work done but saving money at the same time, it's just like actually people can then choose how they shape who they are. And I think that means that people can really be true to themselves and find the culture that works for them rather than it having to imposed on them.
Do you think we because a lot of pressure is put on organisation to create a positive working environment, right? And
Mm,
rightly so. But I think a lot of companies do that, and you get people that go against the grain or decide that that's not what they want, and can be quite toxic. So, do you think that? And this will lead on to my next question. Do you think that we all have a responsibility to create a positive working environment in the office or remotely?
oh, massively. I think there's so much there in terms of like it's no good being given permission to take the time you need to, you know, go and do your exercise or work your hours around whatever else you're doing in your life, but then you choose just to be on all the time. Because, you know, some people will still assume that that's what's actually expected of them, or they don't actually have other stuff to do, so they just focus on work. And there's all these assumptions around what they think they should be doing and what they should be seen to be doing. And I think, you know, companies can give permission to go and behave in a particular way, and actually the permission has to be backed up by checking in. Are you taking that time? You know, are you turning your laptop off at a reasonable time? Are you taking time to go for your run or whatever it might be? But the person themselves has to make sure that they're doing that. And too many people, I think, end up just saying, I've got too much work to do, I can't take that time for me. Or if I take it, I'm actually going to be judged, because I know I've been given permission, but I don't really think that's genuine. So there's a lot there to be done in terms of that kind of individual accountability. And I think we have to, that is two-way, about companies really reinforcing the messages. So we don't just tell you once, yeah, you can go and do what you want to do, but actually our underlying messages are, I really still expect you to get all that work done, even though I know I'm giving you too much work to do in your work hours. Or those kind of underlying messages that really reinforce the need to work too much. But I think also making sure that we're checking in and saying to people, why are you not taking the time? Why are you not doing what we're encouraging you to do? Because it could be that someone doesn't have other activities that go on outside of their work, and their work was everything or is everything, and they are wed to that to the extent where if that goes wrong, they have nothing. So that's an issue in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when you're engaging with companies, they've obviously, if they're engaging with you, they've taken a positive step to saying,
Mm.
we want to. So, where do you start with companies,
Mm.
and in terms of improving them? What are the types of questions that maybe you would ask these people that, people listening to this might start to ask themselves and think, okay, maybe we do need to improve, or actually that's something we could be better at, and things like that. So where do you start with an
Mm.
organization?
That's a really good question as well, because I had this conversation with a company early this week who I spoke to for the first time, and they'd got in touch saying they think they need some support around mental health and well-being. So they're aware that they've got some stuff around, they've got some needs around levels of stress and anxiety and so on. So they wanted something around that. And I said, well, that's fine, we can do that. But actually, in terms of your culture, are you feeling secure that your leadership, this is someone very senior, are you secure that your leadership know how to create the right environment to support good mental health and well-being? So I was taking it broader than this person had sort of brought to me. And she said, oh, no, we haven't really thought about our bigger culture. We were just looking at individuals. And so if someone comes to me looking at individuals, I tend to try and pull them out to look at the bigger picture. It's a bit like the example I was talking about, Milton Keynes, at the start of this conversation. And, asking the questions around, are your leaders clear about their values and their purpose and the behaviours that they want to see in the organisation that's going to fulfil the kind of company that they want to be? So, how do we want to feel how do we want to feel at work when we're at work? How do we want our employees to feel when they're at work? How do we want them to behave? And is everyone clear about how to achieve that? So sometimes so with this particular company, I said I can work with the leadership team about exploring that. I was like, well, that's great. And then we talked about the managers. So how confident are your managers in terms of bringing to life that sense of psychological safety? What does that actually look like in reality? That sense of authentic leadership. What does that mean for me? Because we can talk about it textbook, but actually, what does that actually look like for me? So do your leaders know how to model that? Do they know how to look out for their teams and how to create that sense of team cohesion when they're working remotely? Oh, no, they don't know how to do that. So I ended up kind of putting together a plan which is around working with the leadership level, working at the manager level, and then doing some training for everyone around kind of mental health and mental well-being. But it differs on every single organisation, and I think I get involved with tiny organizations who might have 7 people in them, up to working with the a senior improvement, national improvement team for the NHS, which is massive, and everything in between. And I think how I get involved with all those companies, it's always different. And what I do with all those companies is always different. But it's that sense of, if it's about people and it's wanting to change something in terms of people feeling that they're having a positive experience, something around their ability to engage, to perform, to communicate, to have that sense of identity, meaning and purpose, to navigate change, anything to do with those kinds of aspects, I'll get involved. But I sit down and have quite a long conversation to start with about what's the real need here, rather than what are you just telling me you think it might be.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and then I love the fact that you drill it down into the managers, especially when we're talking about driving that culture and looking after the people. And because as we just described, people overlook the managers and just go, well, it's what we need to improve our culture, therefore we're going to give it, put loads of things on our perk box and things like that, and just that's going to keep everybody happy. And I think that's really important that that organizations focus on that. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you on this today, and it's been really fantastic. So look, I've really loved a lot of what we've said today, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this with everyone. I have 3 quick fire questions for you, which we
Okay.
had at the end. Okay, so um, uh, let's see how we go. So this is really just for people listening to this, things that they could maybe take a better some bite-sized nuggets away if we can. So okay, first one is how do you recognize a good or bad culture in a remote working environment?
Could be your data, which is telling people are leaving, and it could be about your performance and so on. But if people are happy, if they're talking positively about your company, if that's that sense of people enjoying being at work, which means that they're present, they're smiling, they're contributing, they're going above and beyond because they want to, then you're onto a winner.
Fantastic. And what are your top 3 tips for helping an organization develop a positive culture?
Oh, good one. Um, Feedback, absolutely get feedback. Uh, you can't get enough feedback. So that kind of sense of check-ins, we know that check-ins don't happen enough. What's going well, what's not going well. Having the ability to uh, have a clear vision of what it is actually you want that culture to look like, because we band that word around so much, but actually what does that look like for us? And I think having that sense of what our values are now and how we recognize those. So recognizing, focusing our recognition on what it is we really want to be driving now, rather than what we've always just measured in the past.
And what is your go-to bit of advice for business leaders, and why is it so important?
My go-to bit of advice would be always look for opportunities to develop. So don't ever get to the point of thinking, I'm a great leader or I'm a great manager. I know what I'm doing in my job. There's always look for that opportunity to better yourself. Because if you understand that you're on a continual journey of development, as everyone should be, then you know that you can only get better. And that's also then inspiring for everyone around you.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Lisa, that's been brilliant. Thank you very much for that. And for those of you who are listening on your podcasts, please don't forget to check out Beyond the Water Cooler. Some fantastic episodes in there. So I really encourage you to go and have a listen to that as well. Lisa, it's been great having you on. Thanks very much for your time and all of your insight today.
Thanks, Pete, very much.